Now let's move on down the toolbox here on the left-hand side. Let's take a look at the primitives area. Now, the idea behind this area of buttons is that you're going to be changing the red builder brush into the shape of whatever these primitives happen to be. So if you just start left-clicking, for example, if I click on the cone button, you'll notice that the red builder brush converts into this kind of rudimentary cone-like shape. We click on cylinder, you can click on curved staircase, and you're just starting to change the shape of the red builder brush. Extremely straightforward. Now, if you right-click on any one of these, you get the settings for that particular primitive. For instance, if we right-click on cube, we get some settings for its dimensions in X, Y, and Z, its wall thickness, which is really only going to be effective if you switch on the hollow operation. This will give you a cube that is hollow on the inside, and then you can set the wall thickness to how thick the walls are. Pretty straightforward, and each one of these is going to have different settings. For example, if we jump over to a cylinder, we have the Z height, we have the inner radius and the outer radius, which again, outer radius is going to be most useful if we switch on hollow. So again, all of these are going to be a bit different. Now, I'm not trying to chase you away from any of these operations, but generally speaking, in a best case scenario, you're really only going to be using cubes, occasionally a cylinder, and very, very occasionally a cone. Most of these other primitives, again, in a best case scenario, you wouldn't use as a brush. You'd actually bring in a static mesh. For instance, a tetrahedron, if we click on this, we get this sort of diamond-shaped thing. In fact, I'm going to hold down the L key and rotate around it so you can get an idea of what it looks like. But if we right-click on its settings, we can take the sphere extrapolation and start to increase that. So if we set that to, say, 4 and click Build, we get something that looks a lot like a sphere. However, this would be highly inefficient if we were to create it out of BSP geometry. So as a general rule of thumb, you don't ever want to do this. But if you're in a pinch and you do not have access to a 3D modeling application such as 3ds Max or Maya, then perhaps you'd have to take this route. And the same is true of the staircases. So if we click on a staircase, you'll see that we're starting to get kind of a nice curved staircase. If we right-click on its settings, we have some various things we can control here: the inner radius, the step height, the step width, the angle of the curve, the total number of steps. And by changing these values, we can get different types of staircases. But this is really not the way that you would optimally create stairs inside of your level. In a best case scenario, you would create your staircase inside of an exterior modeling package, again, like 3ds Max or Maya, and bring it in as a static mesh, not as a BSP brush. The textures are very hard to get positioned just right, and it's just not efficient in terms of the engine. But if you're in a pinch and you have to do it, this is where you can do it from. Now, a curved staircase is going to run all the way to the ground. You'll notice as the stairs get higher, they're all based at ground level. If we switch up to a spiral staircase, the stairs will keep wrapping over themselves and they don't reach all the way to the ground. So as you change the settings, you could potentially make a spiral that just goes clear out into the distance. And players can run on these. They work just fine, but again, I would try to push you away from using these if you could avoid it. Now, at the very bottom, we have cards, and what this allows you to do is to create two kind of volumetric cards here. So, like, if you had kind of a foggy material on these, you could place these in the distance, and it would look kind of like fog. In older Unreal games, you could use these for things like chains and torch lights and all sorts of stuff like that. These days, that sort of thing is generally handled through either static meshes or particle systems, and so the cards primitive is not something you'll probably find yourself using very often. But if you need it, it's here. So that is a quick look at the various types of primitives. Now, I haven't really talked about the next group yet, but just to make sure we're completely clear, really all these primitive buttons are doing is just changing the shape of the red builder brush. Then you would use your CSG operations, either through the next group of buttons we're going to talk about in the next video, or by coming up to the brush menu and choosing CSG, add, subtract, intersect, or deintersect, in order to kind of push that along. So that is a covering, there's a discussion of the primitive buttons, and that will wrap up this video.